Hello mate, and welcome to another exciting Let's Code 5.0 video. In this video we're going to start putting the codes together for our first minigame. So before we go any further, I probably have to tell you what the first minigame is going to be. And we're going to start off nice and simple, and the minigame complexity is going to increase as we go on. So this first minigame is going to be a nice simple coin toss guesser. So what's going to happen is that the game is going to virtually toss a coin. The player gets to guess whether it's going to be heads or tails. We could choose any title really, it doesn't have to be heads or tails, but that's probably what we're going to go with because it's what people are familiar with. And if they're correct, they make it to the next round. And it's going to be that simple. So it is very much an RNG game, so not much skill involved, but this kind of teaches us the principles of how to kind of build this system. And as I said, we're going to keep it completely modular, so all of the minigame code for this minigame is going to be contained within the coin toss file, so that we could just import it into another game if we wanted to. So we can build up a nice little library of minigames that we can add to our arsenal, so that when we build other types of games, we can put them in there with minimal effort. So I'm still working in the minigame template file at the moment, and then we will copy the data across into the relevant file if we need to. But this is such a simple game that it's almost not worth creating a separate set of files for this, because deleting the information is going to be dead easy when we come to want to use this file for another minigame. So let's kind of put in pseudocode what we actually want to happen, because we're going to have to write a Ren'Py or a Python code block for each thing. So we're probably going to use functions, Python functions. Before you start panicking, we're going to walk through this nice and slowly. So the first thing that we need to do is game tosses a coin. Player guesses heads or tails. No, I know I spelled tails incorrectly there. The wrong kind of tail. If player is correct, start over. If player is incorrect. Now, we could have a series of lives. We could have the player has three sort of fail attempts, meaning that the player can progress to at least a minimum of level 3. So that it's not completely embarrassing if they get the first one completely wrong. So let's do that. Let's do that. If the player is incorrect, they lose life. If the player has no lives left, check if their score is high enough for the leader board. If it is, take their name. If it isn't, oh yeah, silly me, I forgot to put a hash at the start of that line. I forgot to tag it out. There we go. If it isn't, mock them relentlessly. Now, this is a random number game, so there really isn't any skill involved. So going out on the third round is nothing to be embarrassed about, but it doesn't mean that we don't have to have a bit of fun with it. Okay, so those are our code titles, shall we say. We're going to have to write a function for each one of those things. So let's just jump straight into it. And the first thing we're going to do is type def, and we'll just call this one toss coin, like so. And then we're going to put our code for our toss coin in there. Now, what we could do is simply just have a random number that's going to be either 1 or 2. But the way random number generators work in computer code is that they're not completely random. They either have a lookup table of random numbers, or they have a formula which produces a number that appears to be random because the pattern is incredibly long. But by only having 1 and 2, what we're essentially doing is potentially making it a visible pattern. Once we get 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 numbers in, then obviously the player is just going to be able to remember the pattern, keep it going. So we need to create a much larger set of random numbers and then decide whether or not our number is odd or even, so that we can actually have quite a variety of options. So that's what we're going to do. So the first thing we need to do is create a random number. So we're going to say toss result equals random.randint, and then we'll say that the number is going to be within the range of 1 and let's just say 1000. Nice and simple, loads and loads of options there like that. So in order to check if our number is odd or even, what we're going to do is we're actually going to do a modulus operation. Now, what a modulus is, I hear you cry. So if we were to divide a number by, let's say, 7, if their number is not divisible by 7, then we're going to have some decimal value after the decimal point left over. So for example, 21 divided by 7 is 3. So it would have a modulus of 0 because it would be 3.0. If, for example, we were trying to divide 27 by 7, then the answer would be something along the lines of 3.95 or something like that. So the modulus would be 0.95. So if we were to find out if a number has a modulus of 2 that is 0, then we can check whether it's odd or even. So all we have to do is say modulus. We can just say toss modulus, just because, you know, if you're British you'll find that amusing, but if you're not, never mind. Okay, toss modulus equals toss result, and the modulus symbol is the percentage symbol, and we're going to say 2. If toss modulus equals 0, and then we can add another variable, or we can just return whether it's odd or even. I think all we're going to have to do here is just return that it's even, else return odd. Okay, so when we call the toss coin function, it's going to return either odd or even depending on whether our result is odd or even. Nice and simple, isn't it? Now, we don't necessarily have to do this. We could simply say heads, tails. Nice and simple, yeah? And if I were to create a game loop, we could run this and we could type print toss coin just to see if it's going to come up as random. So what I'm going to do, create a game loop. We're going to have to do that anyway, so it makes sense. Okay, so we're going to call this coin toss loop, and remember to use capitals for all of your words in function names. Nice and easy. And the reason we're calling it coin toss loop and not game loop is because we're going to have multiple games, and we don't want multiple games with multiple game loops because it will cause a conflict when we try to call it. In fact, Ren'Py won't even run if we have multiple functions with the same name, because it will say you've already defined this. So we'll have to call it coin toss loop, and then all I'm going to do is I'm going to type in print toss coin, and then I could put a pause in there so that it holds on, but since we're going to have to go to the console manually anyway, it shouldn't be a problem. So all we have to do there is just literally do that. And then I will call coin toss loop from our main script function, because at the moment we don't have a main menu selection to be able to run this. So let's go to our script file, and as you can see, got all this nonsense in there at the moment, and all we have to do is literally just type in coin toss loop. And because we're in Ren'Py code now, we need to put a £sign or a $sign in front of it in order to be able to call it as if it were a Python function. So we called that, And if we want to make absolutely sure we've got it right, we can just copy that. And I know I have, but you know, we'll just copy and paste it over there just to make sure. So when we bring up our file as it runs, we're going to hit start, but we notice nothing's actually happening. And that's because all it's doing is it's running our coin toss loop and then it's coming back to the main menu. So if I hit this 10 or 15 times and then I press Shift O, what we can see here is that it has actually run and it's printed it into the console, and it says tails, tails, heads, tails, tails, heads, heads, tails. So it doesn't appear to be any kind of pattern. It does seem to be random there, and that is actually functioning. So now we can close that down knowing that that part of our code is actually working, which is awesome. So the next part of our pseudocode, we can actually get rid of that one because we now have the coin being tossed. Now we need to be able to allow the player to make a selection as to what their guess is going to be. And for that, we're going to need to create a screen. So let's jump into our screens section. I'm going to do that. So we're going to say screen, coin, and we're going to actually use underscores this time. Toss, player, guess. Like so. And now we need to define a variable as well. So in the top of our screens code, we're actually going to say default player guess equals nothing. And that's just so that the game doesn't accidentally assume that because we have a value in there that the player's already made a guess, because that's not what we want. This is going to be dead simple. All we're going to do is create a frame. And we're going to set that frame into being in the center of the screen. So we type in a line. And we put in a set of parentheses because we're going to put in a tuple. And we're going to have it being in the middle on x. So it's going to be 0.5x. And then what I want it to be is probably about 3/4 of the way down the screen. So I'm going to say 0.6. Like so. And then we can give it a size if we so choose, so that it's always the same size. We can say XY size. And then we can give it a set of variables there. And let's just keep it nice and simple. Let's just say 250x. And we'll say 50 in the Y direction. Next thing we want to do is put in an HBox. And if we could actually just do it with has HBox, to be honest, we don't need to type in that way. There we go, has HBox. And all we're going to do is we're going to put in 2 buttons that have the heads or tails guess in it. So we'll type in button. We could do it as text button, but if we do it as button, we can just replace it a little bit easier later on. And we're going to have text, heads, and we can give it a background. Let's just give this button a sort of gray, slightly opaque background. So we're going to say hash, and I'm going to go with 999, and then the opacity is going to be, let's say, 7, like so. And then what we need to do is give it an action. So we're going to say action, return with a capital R, and then this is going to return heads. Now, because of the way that I'm going to do this, I want to make sure that we use capitals because we want this toss coin result to match this one. So the fact that I've spelled heads wrong isn't a great start. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this and paste it. This one is going to be tails. Tails like that. And then that's all we want this screen to do, really, is present the player with 2 options for them to click on and to return it back, basically. So in our coin toss loop now, what we can do is create a variable called just, I don't know, playing, for example. And we're going to set that to true, if I can spell true. Make sure we haven't got too many spaces there. And then we're going to say while playing. That's our game loop setup. So all we have to do now is we have to do the coin toss result. So we're going to say toss coin. And then we will, actually, no, we don't need to do that. No, I stand corrected. The first thing we have to do is we have to say a UI return is equal to renpy.call underscore screen. And then we're going to call our screen called this. So we'll just copy this rather than risking getting any typos in there. Like so. And then we just have to simply say if UI return is equal to coin toss, which will cause Ren'Py or Python to run this function and return its result. Then we can simply say if they have got it correct, then we can call a function called, let's just say coin correct, else coin toss incorrect, or wrong. Let's just say wrong. It's just a shorter word. It's easier to type. Okay. Happy days. Right. So playing is our main variable that is going to affect whether or not this loop is running. So we want to remember that. And I'm actually going to just add a space there. And then I'm going to delete this line because we no longer need it. So now our game will actually loop. So we'll actually see something on the screen. And in this case, the first thing that we're going to see is this screen here. So that's pretty good. So we've got now the option for the player to guess heads or tails. So we can delete that from the screen. Next thing we need to do is create a screen that's going to show the number of lives. And we're going to do it in a separate screen so that we can keep everything fairly modular. And we'll say coin toss lives. And all we're going to do is create a frame. And we're going to have it in the top left hand corner of the screen, but not the dead top left. So our line is going to be 0.1, comma 0.1, because I don't want it to be dead center. I'm actually going to give this one a slight, an opaque background. Not an opaque background, a completely invisible background. So we're going to just simply say background is none. And then we're going to put text in it. And we're going to go with player lives. And then we're going to put in a curly brace there, like so. And we're going to type in format. Okay, so the format command, for those of you who've never used it before, what it does is we can put in a set of curly braces into a string that we're putting on the screen. And we can type in format. And then inside the brackets, we put what is going to be the replacement value for these curly braces. And I can actually do that with as many values as I want. So I could put, for example, that, and then I will put inside the brackets separated by commas 5 different values. So in this case, we just want coin toss lives, and I'll get rid of all of these extra sets of brackets. But format will not let you use integers, so you have to turn it into a string by using the str command, which is literally just turn whatever is in this into a string. So now we need to create a new variable called default player coin toss lives, like so, and we're going to set it to 3. Nice and easy. And then we can add formatting to this. I'm going to show you how to do that now. So let's say we're going to create a style, and we want it to be called, let's just say, player lives text. And then in here we can say you can give it a size. Let's just give it size 32, for example. Color, we'll give it, let's just make it green, for example. So RGB, so we want our first value to be something like 3. Then green is going to be F, and we'll go with 3 again so that it's not a weird kind of color. And then we don't need to give it an alpha value because we want alpha to be F, so we'll just leave it as is. And that's pretty much it for in terms of that. And then all we have to do here is just say style, and then we can give it player lives text. Now the reason we're doing it this way and not using a style prefix is that we might want to have different styles defined for different pieces of information. So for example, if I were to create a coin toss lives style and then use the style prefix at the top here, all of the text within this screen would conform to that style, rather than if I wanted to just make it one particular style for that particular item. There's different ways. It's entirely up to you how you want to do it. For those of you who don't know what a style prefix is, are probably sat there thinking, what the hell is he on about? We will deal with those further on into the Let's Code series. Okay, so don't panic too much. So what we want is a main UI that is going to contain all of our bits and pieces. At the moment, we call the coin toss player guess. So what we could do is just simply show the player lives on the screen, because we don't really need to interact with this screen. It's just an informational display. So I could just put it in the top of the coin toss player guess, but that means once we've selected this, that it's not going to show that anymore. So for the time being, I will just simply say use coin toss lives, but we may move it elsewhere once we have more stuff set up. Okay, so now we've got a way to display our lives on the screen. We've got a player lives variable. Now we need to define what these two functions, coin toss correct and coin toss wrong, are going to do, because at the moment it doesn't do anything. We could just test that this works, to be honest. Let's do that. So as you can see, we've got our player lives in the top left hand corner, which is what we wanted. We've got our frame, which looks kind of crap because the border is that blue thing that Ren'Py does by default. And then we have our two image buttons, and as you can see, there is a mismatch in the fact that I've got heads being in capitals and tails is not. But if I were to click on it, as you can see, it's saying coin toss is not defined. So we'll quit out of that and we'll find out what's going on. So it's pretty obvious what I did. It's a deliberate mistake. Is actually, this isn't coin toss, this is toss coin. So we can just say toss coin there, and that will resolve that issue. And now we can look at the styling problems in our UI. So the first thing we've got is that frame needs to have its background either removed or changed so that it's not got that blue border around it. I'm inclined to change it so that it's going to be something along the lines of perhaps CCC, and then we need to make sure we put in a hash there, CCC, and then I want to give it a opacity of maybe 4. Like that, or an alpha of 4, sorry, is the more correct term for what I'm doing. And then with my buttons, I can actually remove the background and just have them so that they're text. Now let's just change this so that they both capitalized, like that. And now what I think we need to do is add a spacing amount into our HBox so that they're not bunched right up against each other. So we can say spacing, and then we can just say a spacing of, let's say, 15, and that should work. Okay, so there we go. We've got our frame, we've got our buttons. It's still not perfect. We could change this so that they hover in a center. So let's do that. So we're going to set our X and Y aligns to be in the center. We don't need to have it aligned there. We can just say Y align for this one actually, because we don't really need to set the X align value. Y align, we're just going to say 0.5. Copy that, stick it in this one as well, like that. And now we're going to have to add some kind of... Now we should be fine there actually, thinking about it. So we can come back to our code that's running, and if I press Shift R, it will reload under the new style. And there's still a bit of a issue with it being not central, but we'll come back to that once we've got everything else sorted. So if I click on this, you can say coin cost correct is not defined. So let's go to quit. So we obviously guessed correctly there. It's actually doing everything we needed to do. Now we need to define what these two functions do. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm just going to get rid of that space there, and we're going to go to define our coin toss correct functions and our coin toss wrong functions. So define coin toss correct, and then I'll just do like so, just so that I don't forget where they're going to go. And then as you can see that the code, the text beneath it has now been grayed out because it's not going to work like this until we actually put some code into these things. Now what we could do is add an interesting mechanic where if you get it correct it adds a life, and if you get it incorrect it takes a life away, and that way the player has the ability to extend the amount of time that they can play for. So I think that's what I'm going to do. In order to access any variables that exist outside of this function, so for example if I were to just type in player lives plus equals 1 here, it would actually create a local variable that's only relevant inside this function, which is no good because we want it to be able to access this variable here and change its value. So what we have to do is actually type in global coin toss lives, and actually have to put a bracket, a colon at the end of there, otherwise it's not going to do anything. And we'll do the same. In fact, let's just copy and paste it to make life a bit easier. There we go, coin toss live. So now we can access the coin toss lives nice and easy. And then all we're going to say is if the coin toss is correct. And we've actually got that wrong. So I'm glad I caught myself there, because that would have been an embarrassing typo. I make plenty of them, as you can see. It's because usually my brain is working faster than my hands are. Okay, so coin toss lives. Now all we have to do is say coin toss lives plus equals 1. Copy that one. Coin toss lives minus equals 1. Like so. The next thing we want to do is in our game loop, we now want to say if coin toss lives is equal to, or less than or equal to, because you never know, someone might try and be clever, is less than or equal to 0, playing equals false. So the game will end, as in we will say playing equals false, so it will no longer be while playing, so our game loop will end and we'll return to the main menu once the player runs out of lives. We can add a little bit more functionality to our game once we've got the basic functions operating, and we can make it look prettier and all that. But right now, all we're interested in is making sure that our code works correctly and that it does what it wants to do. So we're bug testing as we go along, and the reason we're doing that is because if you're an independent game developer, getting people to bug test your game, particularly if you're doing it in Ren'Py, is that people, well, you're either going to have to give your game away for free to people to play test it, and in which case there is a highly likely chance that people are going to pirate it before you've even released it, or you're going to have to spend hours doing it yourself. So that's what we're going to do. So our code's running. We're going to hit start. And as you can see, we've got heads or tails. If I hit heads and I get it right, we get a life back. If I get it right again, oh, getting a lot of correct answers. And you can see it did actually drop down. So we're getting a lot of headses. But I can just sit here and mash the heads button, and either my lives are going to go up or down. So as you can see, we can actually get quite a reasonable number of successes just by jabbing the button. But it is, as you can see, my lives are going up and down, up and down. And at some point, it probably is going to go down to the point where I end up actually losing. So I'm up to 20 lives at the moment, which is quite good. So it does seem to be statistically going to be heads more often. So let's switch our tack and we go to tails. And as you can see, it isn't actually that at all, because our score is still going up. Now, that is slightly problematic in that the player, it does rather seem that the player is just going to be able to keep going and going and going, because they're getting the answer right more often than they're getting it wrong. But that is unfortunately the nature of a 50-50 game, as in when the chances are 50-50, they could very well end up ploughing on. If I were to quit the game, come back to the main menu, and then go back in, well, we reset the values, there is equally as likely a chance that I will be out within 3 turns. As you can see, that literally just made my point for me, in that it could go one of 2 ways. So it isn't biased in favor of the player, it's just that that first attempt just happened to be that I got lucky on the first few guesses and had sufficient enough guesses that I could then afford to lose 2 or 3 or 4 straight without going out. So I'm pretty happy with that so far. So I think that about wraps it up for this episode. We've got our code. We're going to just get rid of those bits of pseudocode left, and we've got that bit to do, and we're going to make the game look a bit prettier as well in our next episode. Thanks very much for watching that, Gozo. I hope you found it useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below, as always, and until I see you again, you take damn good care of yourselves, alright? Bye-bye.